The tires crunched over the gravel just as I was setting the last plate on the dining table. Through the front window, I saw the convoy of shiny SUVs pulling into our driveway, headlights slicing through the winter dusk. My wife's family had arrived early again. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and forced my jaw to unclench. The roast chicken was still in the oven. The candles weren't lit, and my shirt was damp from rinsing the lettuce. But they didn't care. They never knocked, never waited for an invitation. This was their house too, or so they liked to say, because it was in their daughter's name. The front door swung open without a sound of knuckles on wood. Cold air swirled into the hallway along with their perfume, cologne, and the faint metallic scent of expensive luggage wheels scraping the tile. My wife Eleanor hurried past me with that nervous smile she reserved only for them. "David's here somewhere," I heard her say. Her voice had that sing-song edge, cheerful but thin, like it might shatter if you touched it. From the kitchen doorway, I watched as coats were peeled off, scarves were flung over the banister. Her father's booming voice filled the living room. "I hope he's kept the place tidy." A low ripple of laughter followed, the kind you hear at someone's expense. Then I caught it. My name, spoken almost in a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "David doesn't even own the place," her mother said. "When the time comes, it'll be our decision what happens to it." Something hot surged under my skin. The roast timer beeped in the background, but all I could hear was the scraping sound of their voices against my pride. I stepped into the living room, towel still in hand. "Glad you could make it," I said evenly, scanning each face. My wife's sister looked away, pretending to admire the framed family photo on the wall, the one I'd paid to have taken. No one answered. They just smiled, those tight, polite smiles that felt more like barbed wire than warmth. The injustice wasn't new. I'd been feeding it for years. The accidental remarks about my salary, the way they'd thank Eleanor for dinners I cooked, the way they'd treat my house like a vacation rental. But this was the first time I'd heard them speak about my future, my home, as if I were already gone. And something in me shifted. The roast could wait, the candles could stay unlit. Whatever quiet, passive version of myself had been hosting them for the last 5 years was gone. Tonight, the game was going to change. If you'd walked into our house 5 years ago, you'd have thought we were the perfect couple. Eleanor with her easy laugh, me with my hands always busy fixing something, painting a room, building shelves, tending the garden. But under that picture-perfect frame, there was a steady drip of something corrosive. It started small. The first Christmas after our wedding, her mother accidentally mentioned that Eleanor could have done better. I laughed it off, telling myself it was just her way. When we bought this house, I put down the entire down payment, $140,000 I'd saved from a decade of double shifts and eating sandwiches over the sink. We both signed the mortgage, but the deed went in her name. "It'll make taxes easier," she said. I didn't argue. The first year was fine. I paid the bills, fixed the leaky pipes, and landscaped the backyard into something that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. But every holiday, her family would descend unannounced, uninvited, walking straight in like they owned the place. I told myself they just felt comfortable here. Then comfort turned into entitlement. Her father would lecture me about real investments while sitting on the deck I'd built with my own hands. Her sister would criticize the wine selection, even though she'd never bought a single bottle. And Eleanor, she never defended me. She'd smile, change the subject, and later tell me, "That's just how they are. Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally, especially because they weren't just guests, they were beneficiaries. Eleanor's father was a retired banker, and her mother had inherited a string of rental properties. To them, my contribution was irrelevant. The house, my work, my money, it all blended into Eleanor's name on the deed, like I was just a long-term tenant who should be grateful for the privilege of living there. Last summer, it got worse. Eleanor's brother, Patrick, stayed with us for a few weeks after his divorce. That turned into 4 months. He parked his dented truck in my garage, used my tools without asking, and left beer cans on my workbench. One night, after I confronted him, he grinned and said, "Relax, man. This place isn't really yours anyway. Eleanor told me to let it go. He's family." Family? The word used to mean something to me. My father died when I was 17, leaving me with a toolbox, a half-paid-off truck, and the belief that you take care of the people you love. That belief kept me working through broken knuckles, sleepless nights, and a back injury that never fully healed. It's why I built a home instead of buying a condo. It's why I thought marrying Eleanor was building something together. But every time her family came around, I could feel my place in my own home shrinking. I'd find myself standing in doorways instead of sitting down, cooking in silence while they laughed in the next room. They treated me like the help, polite enough to keep up appearances, dismissive enough to make sure I knew where I stood. And Eleanor, she'd changed too. She started making decisions without me, big ones. She upgraded the kitchen appliances to brands I couldn't pronounce, booked expensive vacations without asking, and forgot to tell me when her parents dipped into our guest room for weeks at a time. She wasn't cruel. She was worse, indifferent. That's why hearing my name tonight, spoken with that sharp certainty, was the final crack. Because in that moment, I realized they weren't just disrespecting me. They were planning my erasure, talking about the house's future like I was an obstacle to remove. The roast chicken's aroma drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the faint scent of Eleanor's perfume, as she handed her father a glass of wine, my wine from the cellar I stocked. He raised it in a mock toast. "Here's to the future," he said. Everyone laughed. I smiled back, but inside, a different kind of warmth was spreading. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but I knew one thing. By the time the next future toast came around, they wouldn't see it coming. It happened right after dinner. The plates were stacked, the roast picked clean, and the conversation had turned into that smug, looping rhythm her family seemed to enjoy. Half gossip, half self-congratulation. I was clearing the table when Eleanor's mother called out from the living room. "David, could you bring us the dessert plates? And make sure they're the good ones." The good ones, meaning the porcelain set I'd inherited from my grandmother, which I'd specifically told Eleanor was off limits. Before I could answer, Eleanor said, "Of course, Mom," and shot me that look, polite on the surface, but with an edge that meant don't make a scene. I walked into the kitchen, my hands curled into fists. The porcelain set sat in the cabinet, still wrapped in the tissue paper I'd packed it in years ago. My grandmother's hands had set those plates on 100 holiday tables. They were the last tangible piece of her I had. I unwrapped them one by one, each movement deliberate. My chest felt tight. They didn't see me as a man with history, with roots. To them, I was just an accessory in Eleanor's curated life, useful only when I was serving. When I returned to the living room with the stack of plates, Eleanor's father was leaning back in my armchair, swirling his wine like a man holding court. "You know," he said loudly, "Eleanor's been talking about remodeling this place, expanding the patio, maybe even adding a pool. It'll be perfect when it's ours." He didn't even glance at me when he said it. The room laughed again, full, comfortable, confident laughter. Something inside me clicked. Not snapped. Not yet. Snapping is messy, uncontrolled. This was colder, cleaner. I set the plates down on the coffee table right in front of him, hard enough to make the wine ripple. "Careful," I said quietly. "Those have more value than you think." He smirked. "We'll be sure to take good care of them." And there it was, the confirmation I hadn't even realized I'd been waiting for. This wasn't ignorance. This was intent. They were counting down to the day I'd be gone, and the house, my house, would be their playground. I walked back to the kitchen, but I didn't stop at the sink. I went to the small drawer in the corner, the one Eleanor never touched, where I kept the documents that still bore my name, the insurance policies, the receipts, the original purchase records for things they assumed were hers. And as the laughter spilled from the living room into the quiet of the kitchen, I knew tonight wasn't about survival anymore. It was the first move. The porcelain plates, my grandmother's plates, wouldn't be on their table next Christmas, and neither would I. Back in the kitchen, I gripped the counter until my knuckles ached. My reflection in the microwave door looked like a stranger. Eyes sharp, jaw clenched, a thin line of tension running through my shoulders. The logical part of me whispered, "Don't overreact. Keep the peace. You've survived this long by staying quiet." But another voice, deeper and older, rose up from somewhere I hadn't heard in years. "You've been keeping the peace for 5 years, and look where it's gotten you, replaced, erased, treated like a tenant in your own home." I took a deep breath and tried to picture walking back into that living room, smiling politely, serving dessert, pretending I hadn't just heard them lay claim to everything I'd built. That's what Eleanor expected. That's what her family would count on. It would be so much easier to let it slide, to keep my head down until the evening ended. No arguments, no ugly scene. Just another entry in the long ledger of quiet humiliations. But the thought made my stomach turn. I remembered the day I'd moved into this house, our house, hauling box after box up the steps, sweat soaking through my shirt. Eleanor had been in the kitchen unpacking glasses while I wrestled with the sofa alone. I'd told myself it was fine. She was better at organizing. But now, looking back, I saw the pattern had started even then. Me carrying the weight, her making it look presentable. The drawer in the corner called to me again. Inside was the proof, every receipt, every canceled check, every scrap of paper that said this was mine before it was ours. If I acted too soon, though, they'd see it coming. They'd lawyer up, Eleanor would plead innocence, and I'd be the bitter husband everyone pitied. The doubt wasn't just about if I should act. It was about how. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, letting the cold seep through my fingers. I imagined two futures. In the first, I said nothing tonight, kept the peace, and in a year's time I'd be packing my things into cardboard boxes while her family supervised, deciding which of my possessions they'd let me keep. In the second, I played along just long enough to set the board, to make sure when I made my move it would be clean, final, and undeniable. The laughter from the living room swelled again. Eleanor's voice floated through, "David will bring the coffee in a minute." I smiled, not the polite hollow smile they were used to, but something sharper. "Yes," I murmured to myself, "David will bring the coffee. But first I'd start boiling the water for something else entirely." Have you ever been in a room full of people smiling at you, while you knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were plotting against you? It's like standing under a warm light while someone slowly turns down the heat. At first you think you're imagining it, but then the chill sinks into your bones. I wonder what would you have done in my place? Would you have kept your head down, served the dessert, and hoped for the best? Or would you have started planning, right there in the kitchen, how to take back everything they thought was already theirs? Because that night, I made my choice. And it was the last time they underestimated me. The coffee pot hissed softly, steam curling upward as I stood over it, pretending to focus on the brew. In reality, I was memorizing the rhythm of their voices in the next room, who was speaking, who was laughing, who was sipping their wine. I'd learned over the years that their confidence was my best weapon. People who believe you're harmless will walk straight into any trap you set for them. Eleanor's father was holding court again, talking about asset management like he'd personally built an empire, when I knew for a fact he'd inherited his money from his uncle. "Property is everything," he said, his voice swelling with pride. "Once it's in the family, it stays there. In the family." Meaning their family. Not me. I set the coffee cups on a tray and placed it carefully on the counter, but my mind wasn't on caffeine, it was on leverage. I thought about the joint bank account Eleanor had insisted on, the one where my paycheck landed every 2 weeks. I thought about the home equity line of credit she'd opened last year, supposedly for minor renovations, but that I hadn't seen a single invoice for. I poured the coffee slowly, my hands steady, my breathing calm. My grandmother used to tell me, if you ever need to win a fight you can't walk away from, start by making your opponent think you've already lost. When I walked into the living room, their conversation faltered for just a second. I handed Eleanor's mother her cup, careful to keep my expression neutral. "Thank you, David," she said, the words coming out like she was humoring a waiter. "You're welcome," I replied, locking eyes with her for a fraction longer than polite, long enough for her to notice. I took the armchair opposite Eleanor's father and listened as they moved on to talking about vacation homes. Her sister was bragging about a villa she and her husband were looking into in Florida. I kept my face blank, but inside, pieces were shifting into place. Florida meant new investments, which meant they might need cash. Cash they could get by pressuring Eleanor to make changes in her personal life. Changes that involved me leaving quietly. When her father started talking about market timing, I knew exactly where my entry point would be. They thought the timing was in their hands. It wasn't. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and her family had retired to the guest rooms, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom. Eleanor was in the bathroom, humming softly, taking off her makeup. The sight of her vanity table, crowded with creams, jewelry, and perfume bottles I'd paid for, fueled something in me. I walked to my office and unlocked the bottom drawer. The file folders were exactly where I'd left them. Bank statements, receipts, investment documents, all neatly arranged in chronological order. Every dollar I'd put into this house was documented. Every transfer, every check, every invoice with my signature. I sat at the desk, flipping through the pages slowly. The weight of the paper felt like the weight of my future in my hands. If they wanted to turn this into a matter of ownership, I was ready to show them just how much of this family home was mine. Eleanor's voice floated down the hallway. "Are you coming to bed?" "In a minute," I said, slipping the files into a leather portfolio and locking the drawer again. My voice was calm, steady, like I was ending a normal day. But in my mind, I was already laying out the opening moves. This wasn't going to be a messy confrontation over dinner. It was going to be a clean, calculated dismantling of their control. And by the time I was finished, the only thing they'd be inheriting was the memory of how certain they'd been right before it all fell apart. The next morning, the house was quiet, except for the faint clinking of spoons against cereal bowls in the guest kitchen. Eleanor's family had their own little breakfast nook here, something they'd insisted on for convenience during their visits. I padded past them without a word, coffee mug in hand, and went straight to my office. On my desk sat the leather portfolio I'd locked away the night before. I opened it slowly, savoring the sound of the zipper. Inside was more than paper, it was ammunition. First move, control the accounts. Eleanor thought I never paid attention to the online banking dashboard. She was wrong. Over the past year, I'd noticed small but steady withdrawals. Always round numbers, always to household expenses, that never seemed to appear in the actual house. I'd traced a few to boutique shops her mother liked. I logged in and quietly shifted the bulk of our joint savings into a separate account in my name only. A legal move, marital funds can be transferred as long as they're not concealed. I left just enough in the joint account to keep Eleanor from noticing immediately. Second move, the mortgage. They liked to remind me the deed was in Eleanor's name, but they forgot that I had been the one making every payment since day one. I contacted the bank from my office phone, confirming the details of our payment schedule and requesting a copy of the original loan agreement. My name was all over it. As I was hanging up, I heard a knock at the door. Eleanor peeked in, already dressed in the soft pastel sweater her mother had given her last Christmas. "We're going into town later. Want to come?" I smiled faintly. "I've got some things to take care of here." She hesitated just for a second, before nodding. "Okay, don't work too hard." The door clicked shut, and I moved to the third move, insurance. I reviewed the homeowner's policy and noticed something interesting. The coverage amount was set far higher than the property's assessed value, which meant a payout would be lucrative for whoever was on the beneficiary list. And right now, that was Eleanor. I made a note to contact the insurance company on Monday. By late morning, the portfolio was back in its drawer, and I was in the garden, trimming the frostbitten roses. Eleanor's father wandered out with a mug of tea. "Nice place you've got here," he said, as if he hadn't been openly claiming it the night before. I didn't look up. "It's amazing what you can build when you put your own money into it." He chuckled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even suspicion. That was fine. A little tension in the air might make them slip up sooner. The rest of the day passed with small, deliberate choices. I was polite but distant. I let them serve themselves at lunch. I didn't hover, didn't offer to clean up, didn't jump to meet every request. And while they chatted about vacation homes and stock portfolios, I kept my ears open. By dinner, I'd learned that Eleanor's parents were thinking about selling one of their rental properties. They wanted quick cash to finance a business venture her sister's husband was starting. That explained their sudden interest in remodeling my house. It wasn't about comfort, it was about liquidity. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I stood in the hallway again, looking at the closed guest room doors. The sound of their comfortable breathing drifted into the hall. They had no idea the foundation beneath them was starting to shift. I walked back to my office, opened my laptop, and began drafting an email to my attorney. Nothing aggressive, just a request for a consultation about asset protection and documentation of contributions in marital property. By the time I closed the laptop, I was smiling. This wasn't just about defending what was mine anymore. This was about showing them that the man they thought was a harmless background figure was actually the one holding the real keys to their future. And soon I'd be turning those keys in a lock they didn't even know existed. 2 days later, the snow started falling in slow, heavy flakes, coating the driveway in white. Eleanor's family was still camped out in the house, moving through the rooms like they owned them. I kept my distance, but my plan was already past the thinking stage. It was in motion. The call to my attorney had been brief, but decisive. I explained the situation, every payment I'd made, every improvement I'd funded. He listened without interrupting, then said the words I'd been waiting for. "David, you have more leverage than they think, but you need to act before they do." That's when we set the meeting, Wednesday, 10 a.m., to start the process of formally documenting my ownership stake and freezing any unilateral decisions on the property. Once that paperwork was in motion, there would be no undoing it. Eleanor's name might be on the deed, but my name would be on the legal record in a way they couldn't erase. The morning of the meeting, I got up early. The house was still, the kind of quiet you only get before anyone's had their coffee. I slipped into the office, pulled the leather portfolio from the drawer, and double-checked every document. Mortgage statements, bank transfers, receipts for renovations. It was all there. Eleanor stirred as I was putting on my coat. "Where are you going so early?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Just an errand," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I'll be back before lunch." I left before she could ask more. The snow crunched under my boots, the cold air biting at my cheeks. My truck's engine roared to life, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like a commute. It felt like freedom. At the attorney's office, we went through the documents line by line. He asked precise questions, making notes, marking pages with sticky tabs. When we were finished, he leaned back and said, "Once I file this, David, there's no going back. You'll have drawn a line they can't ignore." I signed where he indicated, the pen feeling heavier than it should. Each stroke of my signature was another nail in the coffin of the role I'd been playing, the quiet, accommodating husband who absorbed every slight. When I left the office, the snow was falling faster, the streets muffled and empty. I sat in my truck for a long moment, watching the flakes swirl in the wind, knowing the balance had shifted. There was no pretending now. The path ahead was set. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be walking it as the man they thought they could push aside. When I pulled back into the driveway that afternoon, Eleanor's SUV was gone. Her parents' cars were still there, their tires half buried in the snow, but the house felt quieter than usual. Inside, I found her mother and sister at the dining table with mugs of tea, chatting about some charity gala. They greeted me with a practiced warmth that felt almost convincing. "Eleanor said you were out running errands," her mother said, smiling as if the last 5 years of veiled insults had never happened. "Hope you didn't have to drive too far in this weather." "Not too far," I replied, hanging up my coat. In the kitchen, Eleanor's father was reading the newspaper, a faint smile on his face. "Good news," he said without looking up. "We've been talking, and we think the remodel could be done by summer. You'll hardly be inconvenienced." Hardly inconvenienced. As if I were just a boarder they had to work around. I kept my expression neutral. "Sounds like you've got it all planned out." He finally glanced at me, his eyes scanning for resistance, then relaxed when he saw none. "Exactly. Eleanor's already making calls." So that was it. They thought I was still playing along, that my morning had been spent at the hardware store, or picking up supplies instead of signing documents that would freeze every decision they'd been making behind my back. Later that evening, Eleanor returned, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms full of shopping bags. She kissed my cheek lightly, almost as if she were trying to reset the tone between us. "I picked up some things for the guest rooms," she said, glancing toward her parents, "just to make their stay more comfortable." I nodded, even managed a small smile. "That's thoughtful." She relaxed instantly, mistaking my calm for compliance. "I knew you'd understand." Dinner that night was almost civil. We ate roast beef with mashed potatoes, her father telling stories from his banking days, her mother asking polite questions about my work. No one mentioned deeds or remodeling. No one prodded at the edges of ownership. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed them. After dessert, Eleanor leaned close and whispered, "See, we can make this work. They just need to see you as part of the family." Part of the family. The phrase landed differently now, like a key turning in a lock only I knew existed. Because while she was offering me this truce, papers were already moving toward the county clerk's office. My claim on this house, my financial stake, my leverage, it was all on its way to being carved into the public record. And when the filing was complete, their summer remodel would be nothing more than a pretty daydream. I let her believe in that moment, let them all think the tide had turned back in their favor. Because the longer they floated on that false calm, the harder the undertow would pull when it finally hit. It was 2 days later, just after breakfast, when the first ripple hit. I was in my office, sorting through receipts for a project at work, when I heard Eleanor's voice rise sharply from the kitchen. "What do you mean the payment didn't go through?" I leaned back in my chair, listening. Her tone was a mixture of confusion and embarrassment, the same voice she used when trying to smooth over a mistake in front of her parents. Her father's voice joined in, low but edged with irritation. "They said the last mortgage payment bounced. You didn't change accounts, did you?" There was a pause. Then Eleanor again, softer. "No, David handles that." I gave it another 10 seconds before walking in. Coffee mug in hand. "Everything okay?" Her father turned to me. "The bank says last month's mortgage payment didn't go through. You want to explain that?" I took a slow sip of coffee. I canceled the automatic transfer. Eleanor's eyes widened. "You what?" "I canceled it," I repeated. "I've been the one paying it for years. I decided it's time to reevaluate my contributions. Her mother's teacup hit the saucer with a sharp clink. You can't just... I can, I cut in. And I did. The bank has my name on the loan, not just hers. I have every right to stop payments until certain matters are clarified. Her father's face went red. This house is in our daughter's name. You're just... I held up a hand, keeping my voice calm. You'll want to be careful with the rest of that sentence, because as of this week, my attorney is documenting every cent I've put into this property. And once that's filed, any decisions about this house will need my signature. Silence fell over the kitchen. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice trembling. Why would you go behind my back like this? I set my mug down on the counter, meeting her gaze. Because I've been standing behind you for 5 years while you and your family talked about my home as if I didn't exist. I'm done being invisible in my own life. Her parents exchanged a look, one of those quick, wordless conversations families have, when they realize the game just changed. Finally, her father said, "We'll talk about this later." I smiled faintly. "No, we'll talk about it when my attorney's present." And just like that, the calm surface they'd been enjoying shattered. Have you ever seen someone realize, right in front of you, that they've lost control? It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's a flicker in the eyes, a twitch in the jaw, a pause that hangs in the air like static before a storm. That's what I saw in Eleanor's family that morning. The moment they understood that the man they'd dismissed for years had just pulled the floor out from under them. If you were me, would you have stopped there? Or would you have kept pushing right into the middle of their comfort zone until they had no choice but to face you in front of everyone? Because I wasn't finished. Not even close. The confrontation came 3 nights later. The snow had stopped, leaving the driveway packed with frozen ruts. Eleanor's parents had invited a few friends over for dinner, people I barely knew, but who seemed to know plenty about me, the kind of people who greet you with a smile that doesn't reach their eyes. I'd been quiet all evening, letting them talk, letting them assume I was still the polite, forgettable husband in the background. But I'd also been watching. Every time her father mentioned future plans for the property, I saw Eleanor's mother give him the smallest nod, like they were sealing some silent agreement. Halfway through the main course, the conversation turned toward responsible property management. One of their friends, a realtor of course, started giving unsolicited advice about how to streamline ownership when there's more than one party involved. Her father grinned. "We're in the process of simplifying all that now." That was my cue. And I set my fork down, took a slow sip of water, and said, "Actually, you're not." The table went still. Eleanor shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. "See," I continued, "as of last week, any decisions about this house require my signature, and I don't recall signing off on any remodeling, sales, or simplifications." One of their friends chuckled awkwardly. "Sounds like a bit of a domestic dispute." Her father's smile tightened. "We don't need to air this in front of guests." "On the contrary," I said, leaning forward slightly, "it's about time everyone understood the reality here. For 5 years, I've been the one paying the mortgage, funding renovations, covering every major expense in this house. Meanwhile, I've listened to conversations, some in this very room, about what you'll do with your property when I'm out of the picture." Her mother's face went pale. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "You've misunderstood," her father began. "No," I said firmly. "I've documented. Every dollar, every invoice, every bank transfer is accounted for. My attorney has copies. The county clerk's office will have them too by the end of the week." A long silence followed. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater. The realtor friend cleared his throat. "Well, that changes things." "Yes," I agreed, looking directly at Eleanor's parents. "It does, because from now on, this isn't just Eleanor's house. It's our house, and I won't be erased from it." Eleanor's father opened his mouth to argue, but her mother touched his arm, stopping him. That tiny movement told me everything. She'd realized they couldn't bluff their way past this. Not anymore. I picked up my fork and resumed eating as if nothing had happened. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with the steak knife. No one spoke for the rest of the meal, but I didn't need them to. The silence was a win all on its own. The table cleared quickly after dinner. The guests made polite excuses, their eyes darting between me and Eleanor's parents as they slipped on their coats. The front door shut, and the house was suddenly too quiet, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Eleanor's father was the first to speak. "You embarrassed us tonight." His voice was low, tight. I stood from my chair, not rushing, not raising my voice. "No, I told the truth. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Eleanor's mother crossed her arms. We were trying to keep things civil, handle this like family. I almost laughed. Family. Family doesn't plot to push someone out of the home they've built. Family doesn't treat a man's years of work like a temporary loan. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling. David, we can work this out. We are working it out, I interrupted, by putting everything on record. You're welcome to propose changes, but from now on you'll do it through my attorney, not over cocktails with your parents' friends. Her father's jaw tightened. You think this piece of paper gives you power? We'll find a way around it. I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough to make him lean in. Then you'd better work fast. Because tomorrow morning I'm meeting with a financial auditor to review all the accounts. Anything I've funded that's been siphoned off for unrelated expenses, that becomes part of the claim too. His mouth opened, then closed again. I glanced at Eleanor. That includes the boutique withdrawals, and the minor renovations we never saw happen. The color drained from her face. She didn't speak. The silence stretched until I finally broke it. You've all spent years assuming I'd keep my head down, keep paying, keep quiet. That version of me is gone, and you're going to find life here feels very different without him. I turned toward the hallway, but before leaving the room I added one last thing. Oh, and about that remodel? Cancel it. I already told the contractor the project's off, and I've got his written confirmation. Any work crews that show up will be trespassing. Their stunned faces were the last thing I saw before closing the office door behind me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. I felt like the owner. The next week was the quietest I'd ever experienced in that house. No more casual remarks about future plans, no more entitled orders for me to fetch, fix, or serve. Eleanor's parents kept mostly to the guest wing, speaking in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't around. On Monday morning, my attorney called. The county clerk has filed your documentation. It's official. You're listed as a legal co-owner with full decision-making authority. Any changes now require your signature. The relief was sharp and satisfying, but it wasn't the only win. The financial auditor had finished his review, and the report was even better than I'd hoped. Every questionable withdrawal, every unexplained expense tied to Eleanor's family, was outlined in black and white. My attorney already had the file. I printed a copy and left it on the kitchen counter with a sticky note. We'll need to discuss this. No threats, no accusations, just a statement of fact. Eleanor found it first. I heard the paper crinkle as she read through the pages, her breath catching every few lines. She didn't say a word, just folded it back up and walked away. Her parents left that Thursday, cutting their visit short. No long goodbyes, no fake smiles, not even the usual parting advice from her father. Just the sound of car doors slamming and tires crunching over the snow as they pulled out of the driveway. Eleanor tried, at first, to slip back into our old rhythm, light conversation over dinner, small touches in passing. But the air had shifted. She knew the balance had changed, and that I wasn't about to let it tilt back in her favor. We had our first real conversation the following weekend. She stood in the doorway of my office, her posture unsure. I didn't realize how much I was letting them control things. She said quietly, I looked up from my desk. You didn't just let them. You helped them. She winced but didn't argue. I don't want to lose this house. I don't want to lose you. I leaned back, studying her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't speaking from a position of assumed power. She was speaking from vulnerability. Then things have to change, I said. We make decisions together. We protect what we build. And no one treats me like a guest here again. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. In the days that followed, the tension didn't vanish, but it transformed. The house felt different. Calmer, heavier, with the knowledge that I'd drawn a line no one dared cross. And for the first time in years, when I stood at the kitchen counter with the morning sun spilling across the floor, I didn't feel like I was bracing for an intrusion. I felt like I belonged. Not because they gave me that place, because I took it. Winter melted into spring, and with it the last traces of the siege I'd been living under. Eleanor's parents never returned, not even for a surprise visit. The guest rooms stayed empty, the extra parking spots in the driveway unused. For the first time since I'd moved into this house, the air inside felt still. It wasn't just the absence of their voices, it was the presence of my own. I noticed it in the smallest things, the way I moved through rooms without feeling like I was trespassing, the way I left my tools on the counter without worrying someone would borrow them, the way I brewed coffee in the morning without anticipating an order barked from across the hall. The legal changes had done more than secure my stake in the house. They'd shifted the ground under everyone's feet. Eleanor's family now had to reckon with the fact that I wasn't going anywhere. And more importantly, that I wasn't the man they thought they could manage with politeness and condescension. Eleanor herself was quieter in those first weeks. She seemed unsure how to navigate the new rules, like someone stepping into a familiar room and finding the furniture rearranged. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when I was fixing the garden fence, or reading in the living room as if she were trying to understand how she'd missed this side of me all these years. I didn't make it easy for her. I didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurances. Change had to be real, not just a performance until her parents decided to test the boundaries again. The biggest shift, though, came from inside me. For years, I'd told myself patience was strength, that holding my tongue and keeping the peace was the mark of someone in control. But patience without boundaries is just submission, and I'd been mistaking one for the other. Now I measured my choices differently. I asked myself, does this protect what's mine? Does this reflect the respect I expect? If the answer was no, I acted quickly, decisively, without apology. One evening in late April, Eleanor approached me while I was grilling in the backyard. The scent of rosemary and char filled the air, the last light of the day stretching long shadows across the lawn I'd spent years tending. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady, "about how things were and how they have to be now. I don't want to lose you, David, and I don't want to lose what we have here. I want to rebuild properly this time." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I believed she meant it. "Then it starts with this," I said. "We don't let anyone, your family, my friends, whoever, treat what's ours like it's theirs. We decide together." She nodded, and this time, it didn't feel like a performance. By summer, the garden was in full bloom again. The roses I'd trimmed back in the dead of winter were heavy with color, their petals spilling over the edge of the beds. And every time I passed them, I thought about how growth often looks like nothing at all, until the moment it bursts into view. That's what this house felt like now, not just walls and a roof, but a place that reflected the work I'd put in, the boundaries I'd fought for, and the version of myself I'd finally let out into the light. I hadn't just saved my home. I'd reclaimed myself. Looking back now, I realized the house was never just about bricks and mortar. It was about presence, about refusing to be erased from the story I'd been living in for years. People will take as much as you let them. They'll write you out in pencil, confident they can erase you without smudging the page. But the moment you write yourself back in ink, the game changes forever. So I'll ask you, if someone tried to erase you from your own life, would you let them? Or would you find the pen, press hard, and make sure your name could never be rubbed out? Because in the end, that's all I did. I stopped asking for a place at the table, and I built my own chair.